Hi, viewers. I'm Donna O'Connell. I'm at PHTV Channel 4, and my guest today is Laura Van Blaricom with the Board of Directors of the Palos Historical Society. How you doing, Laura?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me back. My last video, I was overwhelmed by the support. I got nearly 900 views, and as an introvert, it's kind of overwhelming, but in a positive way. I'm sure there are fellow introverts out there who understand how I'm feeling. And I'm here again today to talk about part 2 of my video for the District 117. And before I start, I always want to put a disclaimer. I am not being paid by the district. I am not speaking for any of the retirees out there, and I am not speaking for any current employees, nor am I letting my own personal experiences interfere with my historical interpretations.
Understood. Welcome back, Laura.
Thank you, thank you.
So let's start with the first question. What made you reach out to 117 retirees?
Well, there are numerous reasons for that. One of the most important ones is that I have known 3 retirees since I was 8, 14, and 10 years old, respectively, and I am now 35. And unfortunately, due to that history, there's a chance of bias slipping in. And it's not that I can't ask them, it's I have to be very careful how much I ask and what I ask. And another reason is that I remember over 150 people from my time in 117. I have a very detailed memory, and I eliminated the ones who have unfortunately passed away and gone from there. Now, when some of the major events were happening in the 80s and 90s, I was either not around or I was too young to understand. I wasn't born yet during the 1983 strike, and I was only 6 months old when Quinn and Opalinsky closed. And the final one is, this may sound a bit morbid, but as time goes on, I'm losing primary resources. And to a historian, that is a terrifying fear, so I'm trying to get everything I can out of them while I still can.
Understood. Great job. Okay, so what local tragedy impacted how future 117 schools were built and existing buildings were remodeled and expanded?
Well, before I start talking about this, I do want to put a bit of a trigger warning on there, because this event still has people that remember it that are living. And the events I am talking about is the Our Lady of Angels fire. So if you were impacted by this event, I would suggest you skip this section. And for those that are unfamiliar with the Our Lady of Angels fires, it happened on December 1st, 1958, at the end of the day. A fire broke out, and there were so many issues. There was a lack of communication and confusion, and the fire department couldn't get into the school. And unfortunately, 95 people died, 92 children, and 3 nuns. And while there were safety precautions at this time, they weren't as regulated as they were. For example, fire extinguishers were there, but they were almost 6 feet in the air.
Do they know what started the fire?
There's been some, conflicting information. There are some theories that it was an accidental arson by a kid. Someone improperly threw something away. But it changed the way schools, not just in 117, but nationwide, were built. They, it changed what they were made out of. It changed, there were the extinguisher systems, with the sprinklers, and they made the fire extinguishers more in reach. They had direct communication between the schools and the fire department. The materials they used were different. Annual fire drills. And, it was definitely a tragedy that impacted the nation. And in Oak Ridge, Quinn, and Dorn, the original hallways are actually quite more narrow than the later additions and schools like Conrady. I believe Conrady was the first school built with the updated requirements. And in 1959, after Oak Ridge opened, they closed the 1883 schoolhouse, which was a really good idea because it would eventually be struck by lightning in 1961. Fortunately, they were able to put it out pretty quickly, and nobody was hurt. And to my knowledge, the only fire that has happened on district property since was in the late 90s when the dumpster caught fire at one of the schools.
Ah, okay, interesting. All right, then, when small towns were growing during the years of the baby boom in suburbanation, schools did more than just educating children and were often social hubs or places where major events happened. Were any 117 buildings used for a purpose other than education?
Yes, actually. Dorn was actually the first site of where St. Patricia held their mass.
Oh,
And then they would eventually
okay.
move to Oak Ridge. And I've found sources about Oak Ridge that refer to it as 103rd and Cork Avenue, which is now 103rd and 88th. Back then, when small towns were still growing, schools were used as social hubs. The community centers and libraries weren't around here until the 1970s, and all they had is a school. And actually, Palos Hills became a town at Quinn. That's where the vote was taken and passed.
Wow, okay, the utilization for all types of communication.
Yes.
Okay, so in your opinion, what are some of the biggest factors is why 117 went through so much financial trouble in the 70s and 80s?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, but my main two reasons are the fact that when the previous superintendent, Yarborough, left, the district was already in trouble. They had asked him to leave due to a combination of losing state accreditation, his attitude towards students, and poor performing grades and funds. Now, Herman Henry Conrady came in 1957, and the district was already in trouble, and that was one of the reasons why he got there, because he was trying to save, the district. And while he did a lot, there were 4 schools, well, he built 3 of them, between 1959 and 1974, there were numerous schools built. In that time period, only 2 referendums passed, one in 1958 and one in 1966. It would be almost a decade before the one in 1976 was passed, and nearly 20 years before the one in 1993 passed.
Boy, he sure changed things around, didn't he?
Yes.
Built
yes.
3 schools in the amount of time that he was there.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful.
But unfortunately, with a lack of community support and a growing population, this district was feeling the pressure. By the early 80s, the 30-year loans were going to be on the horizon to be due. And with a dozen referendums being shot down time after time again, it was hard for the district to, keep the district afloat.
Right, keep up with everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, it was bad for a while. And, I'm not blaming anyone in particular. I'm not blaming any situation. It was just a mess.
So Conrady helped them pull out of the financial situation.
Yes, and he did what he could. But unfortunately, after he retired, someone else came in, and they didn't last long. Charles Feigl, he was only there a couple of years. He unfortunately passed away suddenly. And they did what they could, but the wounds were just too severe to completely stop bleeding, and that's what led to the school closings in the late 80s.
Oh, understandable. So can you tell me a little bit about the Children's Better Education Foundation?
Well, the Children's Better Education Foundation was established in July 1971 after the failure of the previous referendum. Its purpose was to raise funds and provide grants and programs that budget cuts took away for almost a decade. It was made up of teachers, administration, parents, and they would hold fundraisers throughout the year. Things like carnivals. I was actually in the newspaper for the carnival at Conrady 30 years ago. Go figure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then they also had things like cosmic bowling, and they had shop at Jewel days where you would go on a selected day and a portion of your purchase would go towards the district. The Children's Better Education Foundation was not the first attempt at, trying to make up the funds that were cut. I found articles dating back to the 80s where parents and teachers were literally paying to save programs like band and other activities. The Children's Better Education Foundation would remain in the district to about the mid-2000s because the 2005 referendum was, enough where they didn't need the Children's Better Education Foundation, but it remained on the district website well into the mid to late 2000s. And I found that information because I went on the Wayback Way machine, and it shows the district's website back to 2002 when it first went live.
Mm-hmm. Seems like it surely did help the schools, though, get through a little bit anyways. Yep.
Absolutely. I was fortunate to benefit from some of these programs because I was in 117 in the mid-90s to early 2000s. And without these programs and grants that the foundation, paid for, I don't think I would be able to get as many opportunities as I did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So has District 117 ever closed due to a severe public health crisis prior to COVID?
Well, it's not uncommon for schools to close for a couple days or so when something like the norovirus or something is going through, but not to the severity of COVID. I do remember one case in 1996 when the school almost closed down because there was some nasty virus going around. St. Patricia actually closed, but 117 used the holiday weekend to sanitize the school.
Clean everything up.
Yes, yes. And in the, I think it was the 70s, there were many cases of scarlet fever, and it definitely had the attention of a lot of people. And I've also heard that in the 80s, prior to the chickenpox vaccine, that there was some field trip to George Williams that almost caused the school closing because everyone that went to George Williams came down with chickenpox.
Oh, boy.
And the viewers have to remember that District 117 has been around since 1858, and that means they've been around for so many pandemics and, you know, viruses and things that kill people. And things like diphtheria, if it got into a classroom, the teacher could lose her own classroom. And I don't have those records, but we can only guess that things like diphtheria and measles and mumps and all those other nasty viruses went through the school at one time. And District 117 was also around for the Spanish flu and TB. And on district property, there was an outhouse and livestock. I'll get to that later.
Okay.
And our ancestors didn't know a lot about germ theory, but they knew there was some correlation between human and animal waste and water contamination.
Interesting. And then what are some of the most interesting or unique or unusual facts about 117? I'm sure there's quite a bit that you know.
Things that I can say on camera?
Yeah.
Well, when you take on a project such as this, you never know what you're going to find, and you have to be careful because you never know what you're going to find. And let's just say that I found things that I didn't think I needed to know.
Well, that's okay. We can skip that and we can go on to some things that
Yeah.
you just think were
Yes, but
funky.
some of the most interesting things is during the age of Prohibition, there was a teacher who was caught bootlegging alcohol. Yes, and the reason why she was caught is because she was driving a car that was way above a teacher's salary, and she tried to use an excuse that she got it as a gift from a father or uncle. Well, needless to say, she was promptly fired.
Okay, understandably.
Yes. And then when Oliver Dorn was in the district, to supplement the teachers' pay, teachers were allowed to grow potatoes and vegetables on property, as well as having a cow.
On the district property.
Yes.
School district. Interesting.
Yes. I
Okay.
mean, hey, you got to supplement it somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
And then
Just
the 1989 school year got off to a rough start because the bus keys got stolen. And teachers ended up driving around the district boundaries telling students there wasn't going to be any school today because the bus keys got stolen.
So what did they end up doing?
Just started school the next day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
No school that day then.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about, we talked about maybe the boundaries, something about the changing of the boundaries.
Oh yeah, the boundaries has been one of the more confusing aspects of my research because towns like Oak Lawn, Worth, Chicago Ridge, Justice, Ridgeview were all established in the early half of the 20th century. And Hickory Hills was in 1951 and Palos Hills in 1959. And all those towns kind of butt up next to each other. And there was some definitely tension growing between the towns because one town was like, no, this is ours. Palos and Hickory were like, no, it's ours. And Dorn was actually in Oak Lawn at one point, but then the boundaries changed.
Oh.
It also explains why some intersections like Southwest and Harlem and 103rd are so confusing because you don't know which town you're in half the time.
Right, then if this local history thing doesn't work out for you, what do you see yourself doing in the future?
I have a couple of backup plans. One is becoming a forensic genealogist. The advancements in DNA technology has helped genealogists in a way that never happened before. Once a genealogist has the DNA test, they can look through family trees, and they've been able to finally solve cold cases, identify Jane and John Does, and let innocent people go. And it gives families, peace, and people a place where they need to be and where they should have been all along. I've also thought about working with autistic children. Last year in March, after I did the video, I was actually hired as a behavioral technician. But then I got accepted into Jamestown Field School. And that was a once-in-a-life opportunity I was not going to pass up, so I really didn't get far into my behavioral technician role, but it's something I would love to return to someday.
Sounds like you got a couple of careers that would work out for you great, but you've done your homework on District 117. You're very knowledgeable about it, and our viewers, I'm sure, thank you for everything that you had to say about District 117 today. I know we're going to have a follow-up sequel to this one as well, probably number 3 coming. I'm not sure when, but please, viewers, watch PHTV Channel 4, and we will definitely have Laura Van Blaricom back here again discussing more about District 117. Thank you, Laura, for being with us today.
And thank you for having me here.
Thank you.